Marcus Thompson had always been the type of person who lived for the moment. At 28 years old, he had built a modest following on social media through increasingly daring pranks and stunts. His YouTube channel, Marcus Mayhem, boasted nearly 50,000 subscribers who eagerly awaited his next outrageous adventure. The tall, lanky American with sandy brown hair and an infectious grin had made a career out of pushing boundaries, and his latest trip to London was supposed to be the crown jewel of his content creation journey. The idea had struck him while scrolling through travel blogs in his cramped studio apartment in Denver, Colorado. Every tourist visited Buckingham Palace, but how many had actually done something memorable there? Marcus had watched countless videos of tourists posing next to the stoic royal guards, trying to make them break character. It seemed so predictable, so boring. He wanted to do something that would go viral, something that would set him apart from every other travel vlogger documenting their European adventures. Marcus spent weeks planning what he called Operation Royal Splash. The concept was simple but audacious. He would approach one of the famous red uniform guards during their ceremonial duties and douse them with water, filming their reaction for his channel. In his mind, it would be harmless fun that would generate millions of views and catapult his channel to new heights. He researched the guard schedules, studied the layout of the palace grounds, and even practiced his approach with friends back home. His girlfriend Sarah had been less than enthusiastic about the plan. During one of their last conversations before his departure, she had expressed serious concerns about the potential consequences. Marcus, these aren't just actors in costumes, she had warned him over video call, her face creased with worry. These are real soldiers with real duties. And you're talking about doing this at one of the most heavily secured locations in the world. But Marcus had brushed off her concerns with his characteristic confidence, insisting that the worst thing that could happen would be a stern talking to from security. The flight to London had been filled with anticipation and nervous energy. Marcus had packed his professional camera equipment, ensuring he had multiple angles covered for the perfect shot. He had even brought along waterproof cases for his gear, knowing that his prank might result in some splashback. During the 8-hour flight, he mentally rehearsed every aspect of his plan, visualizing the sequence of events that would make him internet famous. London welcomed Marcus with its typical overcast sky and bustling energy. He checked into a modest hotel near Hyde Park, immediately beginning his reconnaissance mission. For 3 days, he visited Buckingham Palace repeatedly, observing the changing of the guard ceremony and studying the patterns of both the guards and the security personnel. He noted the positions of cameras, the flow of tourist traffic, and the optimal locations for making his move. The royal guards fascinated Marcus despite his irreverent intentions. These were members of the household division, elite soldiers who had earned their positions through rigorous training and unwavering dedication. The particular guard unit he had been observing was the Grenadier Guards, recognizable by their tall black bearskin hats and red tunics adorned with white plume and blue collar patches. Each guard stood motionless for hours at a time, maintaining perfect posture despite the weather, the crowds, and the constant flash of tourist cameras. Marcus learned that the guards he was watching were not merely ceremonial figures. Many had served in active combat zones, including Afghanistan and Iraq. Their duties at the palace were considered among the highest honors in the British Army. The regulations governing their behavior were strict and comprehensive, covering everything from how they should respond to attempts at interaction to the precise positioning of their rifles and the timing of their movements. What Marcus failed to fully comprehend during his observation period was the level of security surrounding the royal residence. Buckingham Palace was protected by multiple layers of defense, including both visible and concealed security measures. Armed police officers patrolled the grounds, while plainclothes security personnel mingled among the tourists, constantly scanning for potential threats. Advanced surveillance systems monitored every inch of the public areas, and rapid response teams were positioned strategically throughout the vicinity. On his 4th day in London, Marcus felt ready to execute his plan. The weather was perfect for his purposes, overcast but dry, with moderate crowds that would provide both audience and cover for his approach. He had selected a specific guard post near the main entrance where tourists commonly gathered for photographs. The location offered him multiple escape routes and what he believed would be optimal camera angles for capturing the guard's reaction. Marcus spent the morning reviewing his equipment and mentally preparing for the prank. He had purchased a large water bottle the previous evening, one that would create a dramatic splash without causing any real harm. In his hotel room, he practiced his approach one final time, timing his movements and rehearsing his lines for the camera. He planned to shout something witty just before dousing the guard, ensuring that his audio would be clear for the video editing process. The weight of anticipation sat heavily on his shoulders as he made his way toward Buckingham Palace that afternoon. Marcus had told himself repeatedly that this was just another prank, no different from the dozens he had pulled in shopping malls and public parks back home. But something about the grandeur of the palace and the solemnity of the guards made this feel different, more significant. He pushed these doubts aside, focusing instead on the potential rewards: viral fame, increased subscribers, and the financial benefits that would follow. As he approached the palace gates, Marcus noticed the usual throng of tourists, their cameras and phones capturing every angle of the magnificent building and its protectors. Children pressed their faces against the iron railings while parents snapped photos and guided tours shared historical facts about the monarchy. The atmosphere was one of reverence and excitement, with visitors from around the world gathering to witness a piece of living history. The guard Marcus had selected as his target stood perfectly still at his post, rifle held in the traditional position, eyes fixed forward in an unwavering gaze. His red uniform was immaculate, every button polished to perfection, every crease precisely aligned. The young soldier, likely in his early 20s, had achieved the kind of discipline and bearing that took years to develop. His name was Private James Mitchell, though Marcus would never learn this detail. Private Mitchell had been serving with the Grenadier Guards for 3 years and had earned his position through exemplary service and unwavering commitment to his duties. Marcus positioned himself among a group of tourists about 20 feet from the guard, pulling out his camera and beginning to film what he presented as a typical tourist documentation of his London experience. His heart raced as he spoke to the camera, introducing the location and building up to what he described as an epic surprise for his viewers. Several other tourists glanced at him curiously, but most were too focused on their own photography to pay much attention to the enthusiastic American with his professional-looking camera setup. The moment felt surreal as Marcus prepared to cross the line from observer to participant. Everything around him seemed to slow down as his adrenaline spiked. The conversations of other tourists became muffled background noise. The clicking of camera shutters turned into a rhythmic soundtrack, and the imposing presence of Buckingham Palace seemed to loom even larger overhead. This was it, the moment that would define his trip to London and potentially change the trajectory of his online career. Unknown to Marcus, his activities had not gone entirely unnoticed. A plainclothes security officer had been observing his behavior for several minutes, noting the way he had been filming the same guard repeatedly and the nervous energy in his movements. In a world of royal protection, anything out of the ordinary was cause for attention, and Marcus's obvious excitement and focused filming had triggered the trained instincts of the security professional. As Marcus took his final preparatory breath and began to move toward his target, he was completely unaware that multiple pairs of trained eyes were now tracking his movement. The security apparatus of Buckingham Palace had shifted into a state of heightened alertness, though the tourists around him remained blissfully unaware of the tension that was building beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary afternoon at one of London's most famous landmarks. With his water bottle concealed in his jacket pocket and his camera rolling, Marcus began his approach toward Private Mitchell. The distance of 20 feet had never seemed so vast, yet each step brought him closer to what he believed would be his moment of viral glory. The autumn afternoon sun broke through the clouds just as he started walking, casting dramatic shadows across the palace courtyard and creating what Marcus thought would be perfect lighting for his video. The other tourists continued their activities, unaware that they were about to witness an incident that would make international headlines within hours. A family from Japan was taking turns posing next to the guard post, their children giggling with excitement at being so close to a royal palace guard. An elderly couple from Germany stood nearby, the woman reading aloud from a guidebook while her husband adjusted his camera settings. A group of American college students on a study abroad program were comparing their photos and debating the best angle for their Instagram posts. Private Mitchell maintained his stoic pose, his training having prepared him for all manner of tourist behavior. Over his 3 years of service, he had witnessed countless attempts to make him react. Tourists had made faces, told jokes, performed dances, and even proposed marriage in front of him, all hoping to crack his professional demeanor. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to ignore distractions while remaining alert to any genuine threats. The discipline required for this level of focus was extraordinary, representing years of military conditioning and personal dedication. As Marcus drew closer, his confidence began to waver slightly. The reality of what he was about to do started to sink in. This wasn't some college campus prank or a stunt in a public park. This was one of the most secure and revered locations in the United Kingdom, a place where tradition and respect were paramount. But his desire for internet fame and the adrenaline coursing through his system pushed him forward, overriding the small voice of caution in his head. The plainclothes security officer who had been monitoring Marcus's behavior began moving closer, though he maintained the appearance of a casual tourist. Detective Sergeant Williams of the Metropolitan Police's Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit had 15 years of experience in close protection work. His trained eye had immediately identified Marcus as someone worth watching. The combination of nervous energy, focused filming, and obvious American tourist enthusiasm had set off his internal alarm system. Detective Sergeant Williams spoke quietly into his concealed radio, alerting his colleagues to the potential situation developing near the guard post. "Control, this is Williams. I have a possible situation developing at the main gate. American male, late 20s, been filming the same guard for an extended period. Moving to intercept position." The response was immediate and professional, with additional units beginning to subtly reposition themselves around the area. Marcus was now just 10 feet from Private Mitchell, close enough to see the individual threads in the guard's immaculate uniform and the reflection of the crowd in his polished boots. The young soldier's breathing was so controlled that his chest barely moved, and his eyes remained fixed on some distant point beyond the gathering crowd. The discipline on display was remarkable, representing not just personal commitment, but generations of military tradition dating back centuries. The water bottle felt heavy in Marcus's pocket as he prepared for the final phase of his plan. He had practiced this moment dozens of times in his hotel room, visualizing the smooth motion of removing the bottle, the dramatic arc of water through the air, and the shocked reaction of the guard. In his imagination, the prank had always gone perfectly, funny, harmless, and guaranteed to generate millions of views and countless shares across social media platforms. What Marcus had failed to consider in his planning was the sophisticated nature of modern royal security. Every person approaching the guards was being monitored by multiple cameras equipped with facial recognition technology. His movements had been tracked and analyzed by computer systems that could detect unusual behavior patterns. The moment he had begun his focused approach toward the guard post, automatic alerts had been generated and sent to security personnel throughout the area. Inspector Davies, the senior protection officer on duty that afternoon, was reviewing the camera feeds when Marcus's behavior triggered the system alerts. With over 20 years of experience in royal protection, Inspector Davies had seen every conceivable type of threat and disturbance. The combination of Marcus's obvious excitement, his professional camera equipment, and his determined approach toward the guard immediately raised red flags. "All units, we have a code, yellow developing at Gate 3. American male approaching the guard post with suspicious intent." The response was swift and coordinated. While maintaining their cover as tourists and bystanders, multiple security personnel began converging on Marcus's position. Their movements were so subtle and professional that the genuine tourists around them remained completely unaware of the developing situation. This level of coordination was the result of countless hours of training and years of experience in protecting the royal family and their residences. Marcus, oblivious to the security response forming around him, continued his approach with growing excitement. He could almost feel the rush of viral fame that would follow his successful prank. In his mind, he was already planning the follow-up videos, the media interviews, and the sponsorship deals that would result from his moment of internet glory. The possibility of serious consequences seemed distant and unlikely, overwhelmed by his enthusiasm for the stunt. At 5 feet from the guard post, Marcus reached into his pocket and grasped the water bottle. The plastic container, filled with room-temperature tap water from his hotel, represented what he believed would be the pinnacle of his pranking career. He had even practiced the motion of removing it quickly and smoothly, ensuring that the camera would capture every moment of the action. His thumb found the sports cap, ready to flip it open at the crucial moment. Private Mitchell, despite his training to ignore distractions, began to sense something unusual in the approaching tourist behavior. While his eyes remained fixed forward, his peripheral vision and other senses had detected the increased tension in Marcus's movements. The guard's training included awareness of potential threats, and something about this particular tourist was triggering his instincts. His grip on his rifle subtly adjusted, though the movement was so slight that only a trained observer would have noticed. The moment of truth arrived as Marcus pulled the water bottle from his pocket with what he thought was smooth confidence. The plastic container caught the afternoon sunlight as he raised it, and for a split second, everything seemed to pause. The conversations of nearby tourists continued. Children laughed in the background, and the normal sounds of London traffic provided a steady backdrop to what was about to become a very serious incident. "Hey everyone, watch this!" Marcus called out loudly, addressing both his camera and the crowd around him. Several tourists turned to look, their curiosity piqued by the enthusiastic American's announcement. This was exactly what Marcus had hoped for, an audience to witness and potentially film his prank from multiple angles. The more documentation there was, the more likely his stunt would spread across the internet like wildfire. In one fluid motion that he had practiced countless times, Marcus flipped open the cap of the water bottle and drew back his arm to throw the contents at Private Mitchell. The arc of his arm was perfect, the trajectory calculated to drench the stoic guard from head to toe. This was it, the moment that would make him internet famous and finally given the recognition he believed he deserved. But as the water left the bottle in a silvery stream through the afternoon air, Marcus suddenly realized that the reactions around him were not what he had expected. Instead of laughter and excited chatter from the tourists, there was a sudden hush, followed immediately by sharp shouts and the sound of running feet. The water hit Private Mitchell squarely in the chest, soaking through his pristine red uniform and creating dark stains across the fabric. "Armed police! Don't move!" The shout came from behind Marcus, cutting through the air with unmistakable authority. Detective Sergeant Williams had closed the distance rapidly, his identification clearly visible as he approached with backup officers materializing from seemingly nowhere. The casual tourists around the guard post suddenly revealed themselves to be highly trained security personnel, their coordinated response happening so quickly that genuine tourists barely had time to process what was occurring. Marcus stood frozen, the empty water bottle still in his hand, as the full weight of his actions began to dawn on him. This wasn't going according to plan. Where he had expected laughter and viral video content, he instead found himself surrounded by serious-faced police officers with their hands positioned near their weapons. The tourists who had been casually observing moments before were now backing away, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a major incident. Private Mitchell, despite being soaked and undoubtedly surprised by the sudden attack, remained at attention. His training had prepared him for unexpected situations, and while this particular scenario might not have been covered in detail during his instruction, his disciplined response was automatic. Water dripped from his bearskin hat and uniform, but his posture remained perfect, his rifle properly positioned, his eyes still fixed forward. Only the slight tightness around his eyes betrayed any reaction to what had just occurred. The security response was overwhelming in its speed and coordination. Within seconds, Marcus found himself surrounded by at least 6 officers, all of whom had appeared as if from thin air. Their professional movements and calm, but firm voices indicated years of training in handling exactly these types of situations. What Marcus had viewed as a harmless prank, they were treating as a potential security threat at one of the most sensitive locations in the United Kingdom. "Put the bottle down slowly and place your hands behind your head," commanded Inspector Davies, who had arrived on scene within moments of the incident. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The inspector's eyes remained fixed on Marcus, while his peripheral vision monitored the crowd of tourists who were now craning their necks to see what was happening. The reality of his situation crashed down on Marcus like a physical weight. This was no longer a prank gone slightly wrong. This was a serious legal matter with potentially severe consequences. As he slowly lowered the water bottle and raised his hands, he could hear the excited chatter of tourists and the distinctive sound of multiple camera shutters clicking rapidly. Ironically, he was achieving his goal of being filmed and photographed extensively, but not in the way he had envisioned. The handcuffs clicked shut around Marcus's wrists with a finality that seemed to echo across the palace courtyard. The cold metal against his skin brought home the gravity of his situation in a way that nothing else could have. Detective Sergeant Williams maintained a firm grip on Marcus's arm as he read him his rights, his voice professional and measured despite the chaos of tourists and cameras surrounding the scene. "You are under arrest on suspicion of assault on a member of the armed forces and causing a public nuisance. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence." The familiar words of the caution carried extra weight in this setting, where the intersection of law, tradition, and national security created layers of potential consequences that Marcus was only beginning to comprehend. The crowd of tourists had swelled considerably as word of the incident spread through the area. Smartphones were held high, capturing every moment of Marcus's arrest from multiple angles. The irony was not lost on him that he was finally getting the viral video coverage he had sought, but as the subject of a criminal arrest rather than a successful prank. The excited chatter of onlookers mixed with the professional communications of the security team, creating a surreal soundtrack to his public humiliation. Private Mitchell continued to stand at attention throughout the commotion, though a replacement guard was already being summoned to relieve him. The young soldier's uniform was still damp from Marcus's attack, dark patches of water staining the pristine red fabric and creating an image that would undoubtedly appear in newspapers around the world within hours. Despite his soaked condition, Mitchell maintained perfect military bearing, his training overriding any personal discomfort or embarrassment he might have felt. As Marcus was led away from the guard post, he caught glimpses of the sophisticated security apparatus that had responded to his actions. Plainclothes officers who had been virtually invisible among the tourists were now coordinating with uniformed police, their professional movements revealing years of specialized training. The response had been so swift and coordinated that it was clear this type of incident, while perhaps unusual in its specific details, was something for which they had extensively prepared. Inspector Davies coordinated the scene with practiced efficiency, ensuring that witnesses were identified and statements began to be taken while the physical evidence was properly secured. The empty water bottle that Marcus had dropped was carefully bagged and labeled, though its significance was obvious to everyone present. The inspector's radio crackled with updates from other units as the security assessment expanded beyond the immediate incident to ensure no broader threat existed. The journey to the police vehicle gave Marcus his first real opportunity to process what had just happened. The weight of the handcuffs, the firm grip of the arresting officer, and the stares of dozens of tourists created a nightmare scenario that was the complete opposite of his intended outcome. Instead of triumphant viral fame, he was facing criminal charges in a foreign country, with no clear understanding of what those charges might ultimately entail. The police van that transported Marcus away from Buckingham Palace was equipped with a partition between the front and rear compartments, leaving him alone with his thoughts for the first time since the incident began. The gravity of his situation was beginning to sink in as the adrenaline rush of the prank faded and was replaced by growing anxiety about the legal and personal consequences he would face. His phone, which had been confiscated as evidence, contained not only the footage of his prank, but also his detailed planning videos and research materials. Detective Sergeant Williams sat in the front passenger seat, reviewing his notes and coordinating with the custody sergeant at the station where Marcus would be processed. The officer's experience with tourist-related incidents had taught him that these situations often involved individuals who had severely underestimated the seriousness of their actions. The combination of social media culture and vacation mentality frequently led to poor decision-making, but the location and target of this particular incident elevated it far beyond typical tourist misbehavior. The Westminster Police Station where Marcus was taken was a modern facility equipped to handle a wide range of criminal investigations. As the van pulled into the secure custody area, Marcus could see the institutional architecture and security measures that emphasized the serious nature of his circumstances. This was no longer the exciting adventure he had envisioned, but rather the beginning of what would likely be a complex and stressful legal process. The custody suite was a stark, clinical environment designed for efficiency and security rather than comfort. Bright fluorescent lighting, polished concrete floors, and reinforced glass barriers created an atmosphere that left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. Marcus was processed with the same methodical attention to detail that was applied to all arrestees, regardless of the nature of their alleged crimes. Custody Sergeant Patricia Reynolds had been processing arrestees for over 15 years and had developed an ability to quickly assess the mental state and potential risk level of individuals brought into her facility. Marcus presented as a confused and increasingly frightened young man who was beginning to realize that his attempt at internet fame had resulted in very real legal consequences. His cooperation during the booking process was complete, though his questions about when he might be released suggested a fundamental misunderstanding of the severity of his situation. The personal property inventory process revealed the extent of Marcus's preparation for his prank. Multiple cameras, backup batteries, memory cards, and editing equipment demonstrated that this had been a planned and premeditated action rather than a spontaneous moment of poor judgment. The custody sergeant noted each item carefully, knowing that the prosecution would likely use this evidence to demonstrate the calculated nature of the offense. Marcus's phone contained a treasure trove of evidence that would prove crucial to the case against him. Videos recorded in his hotel room showed him planning the prank, practicing his approach, and discussing his expectations for the viral response. Messages to friends back home revealed his awareness that the action might result in trouble, though his casual dismissal of potential consequences would not serve him well in court. The duty solicitor who was called to represent Marcus was Sarah Chun, an experienced criminal defense lawyer who specialized in cases involving tourists and visitors to London. Chun had handled numerous cases where foreign nationals had found themselves in serious legal trouble due to cultural misunderstandings or poor decision-making, though few as high-profile or potentially serious as the assault on a royal guard. During their initial consultation in the small interview room at the police station, Chun explained to Marcus the full scope of the charges he was likely to face. Assault on a member of the armed forces was a serious offense that could result in significant prison time, while the location and circumstances of the incident added layers of complexity that could lead to additional charges related to public order and national security. Mr. Thompson, I need you to understand that this is not a simple case of tourist misbehavior, Chun explained, her voice gentle but firm. The combination of the target, the location, and the premeditated nature of your actions has created a situation where the authorities are treating this as a serious criminal matter. The fact that it was filmed and intended for broadcast could actually make things worse, as it suggests an intention to humiliate not just the individual guard, but the institution he represents. The legal implications were staggering in their complexity. Beyond the immediate criminal charges, Marcus faced the possibility of being declared persona non grata and banned from entering the United Kingdom in the future. His actions had occurred at a location that was not only the residence of the monarch, but also a working government building and military installation, which added additional layers of potential security-related charges. Chin explained that the prosecution would likely argue that Marcus's actions constituted not just assault, but also a deliberate attempt to undermine the dignity and authority of the Crown's representatives. In British law, attacks on symbols of royal authority were treated with particular seriousness, reflecting centuries of legal tradition that protected the monarchy and its representatives from deliberate humiliation or harm. The interview with detectives took place several hours after Marcus's arrest, giving him time to fully consider the magnitude of his situation. Detective Inspector Margaret Foster, who specialized in cases involving threats to royal security, led the questioning with her colleague Detective Constable James Wright. Their approach was professional but thorough, designed to establish not only what had happened, but also Marcus's intent and mental state at the time of the incident. Mr. Thompson, can you explain to us why you chose to target a member of the Royal Guard for this prank? Detective Inspector Foster's question was direct and went to the heart of the prosecution's likely strategy. The targeting of a specific representative of royal authority, rather than a random individual, will be crucial to establishing the seriousness of the offense in the eyes of the court. Marcus's explanation of his desire for viral fame and increased social media followers seemed increasingly shallow and inappropriate as he spoke the words aloud in the clinical environment of the police interview room. What had seemed clever and harmless in his Denver apartment now sounded juvenile and disrespectful when described to experienced police officers who dealt with genuine threats to public safety on a daily basis. The detectives were particularly interested in Marcus's preparation and planning, which his own videos and social media posts had documented in extensive detail. The evidence showed that he had spent considerable time researching the guards, their schedules, and the layout of the palace grounds. This level of preparation would make it impossible for his defense to argue that the incident had been a spontaneous moment of poor judgment. During the interview, Marcus learned more about Private Mitchell and the impact his actions had had on the young soldier. The guard would need to be relieved from duty for the remainder of his shift. His uniform would require professional cleaning and possible replacement, and he would be required to file detailed incident reports that would become part of his permanent military record. What Marcus had viewed as harmless fun had created real consequences for a dedicated professional who had done nothing to deserve such treatment. The psychological impact on Private Mitchell was something that Marcus had never considered during his planning. The young soldier had joined the elite Grenadier Guards through years of rigorous training and exemplary service, viewing his position as one of the highest honors available in the British Army. To be targeted for humiliation while performing his duties was not just personally embarrassing, but represented an attack on everything he had worked to achieve. As the interview progressed, it became clear to Marcus that his actions were being viewed through a lens of national security and public order rather than simple criminal assault. The location of the incident, the symbolic importance of the target, and the premeditated nature of the attack had elevated what he had intended as a harmless prank into a matter of significant legal and political concern. The international media attention that the incident was already generating added another layer of complexity to the case. Videos of Marcus's arrest were spreading across social media platforms, but rather than the positive viral fame he had sought, the coverage was overwhelmingly negative. Comment sections were filled with outrage at his disrespect for British traditions and military service, while news outlets were beginning to frame the story as an example of American tourist behavior at its worst. By the time the interview concluded, Marcus was beginning to understand that his prank had consequences that extended far beyond his own legal troubles. His actions had created an international incident that reflected poorly on American tourists in general and had caused genuine harm to a dedicated serviceman who had been performing his duties with honor and professionalism. The night in the police cell was the longest of Marcus's life. The stark concrete walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and thin mattress on the metal bench provided a sobering environment for reflection on the events that had brought him to this point. Sleep came only in fitful intervals, interrupted by the sounds of other detainees and the constant awareness of his precarious situation thousands of miles from home. Marcus found himself replaying the incident over and over in his mind, each mental review revealing details he had missed in the heat of the moment. The professionalism of the security response, the hurt and disappointment in Private Mitchell's eyes, and the shocked gasps from genuine tourists who had witnessed his arrest all painted a picture very different from the triumphant viral moment he had envisioned. The morning brought his first appearance before Westminster Magistrates Court, where the formal charges against him would be read and his bail status determined. Sarah Chin met with him before the hearing to prepare him for what would be a very public and potentially humiliating experience. The courthouse was surrounded by media crews from international news organizations, all eager to capture footage of the American tourist who had dared to assault a royal guard. The prosecution is likely to oppose bail, given that you're a foreign national with no ties to the United Kingdom, Chin warned him as they sat in the consultation room adjacent to the courthouse. They'll argue that you present a flight risk and that the seriousness of the charges warrants keeping you in custody until trial. We'll need to present a compelling argument for why you should be released, and that will likely require significant financial guarantees and strict conditions. The magistrate who presided over the hearing was Judge Eleanor Hamilton, a veteran of the criminal justice system with over 20 years of experience dealing with cases ranging from minor public order offenses to serious crimes against the state. Her reputation for fairness was matched by her intolerance for frivolous or disrespectful behavior, particularly when it involved attacks on British institutions or traditions. Marcus stood in the dock as the charges were formally read, the legal language making his actions sound far more serious and calculated than he had ever intended them to be. Marcus James Thompson, you are charged with assault on a member of His Majesty's Armed Forces, contrary to Section 42 of the Armed Forces Act 2006, and with causing a public nuisance, contrary to common law. How do you plead? The weight of the moment was overwhelming as Marcus entered his plea of not guilty, though Chin had already warned him that the video evidence made contesting the facts of the case virtually impossible. The plea was more about preserving options for sentencing than about actually disputing what had occurred in front of dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras. The prosecution's case for remanding Marcus in custody was presented by Crown Prosecutor James Whitfield, whose experience with high-profile cases involving threats to royal security gave him particular insight into the seriousness of the charges. Your Honor, this defendant traveled to the United Kingdom and deliberately planned an attack on one of our most important national symbols. His own video evidence shows extensive premeditation and a callous disregard for the dignity of our armed forces and the crown they represent. Whitfield continued his argument by highlighting the international attention the case had already generated and the potential for Marcus to become a focal point for anti-British sentiment if he were released pending trial. The defendant's actions have already inspired copycat threats on social media, with individuals posting plans to target other royal sites. Releasing him would send entirely the wrong message about how seriously we take threats to our national security and constitutional monarchy. Chin's argument for bail focused on Marcus's lack of criminal history, his cooperation with the investigation, and the availability of his family to provide financial guarantees for his appearance at trial. Your Honor, Mr. Thompson is a first-time offender who made an incredibly poor decision while caught up in the excitement of travel and social media culture. He has expressed genuine remorse for his actions and has already suffered significant consequences through the international media coverage of this incident. The magistrate's decision reflected the serious nature of the charges while acknowledging Marcus's lack of criminal history. Bail was granted, but with conditions so strict and expensive that they effectively amounted to house arrest in a foreign country. Marcus would be required to surrender his passport, report to police daily, stay at a specified address, and provide a cash surety of £50,000, which would require his family's assistance to secure. The international media response to the case was swift and largely negative. News outlets across the United States picked up the story as an example of American tourists behaving badly abroad, while British media focused on the disrespect shown to military traditions and royal institutions. Social media discussions were particularly harsh, with many commenters expressing outrage at what they perceived as a privileged American's casual dismissal of foreign customs and laws. Marcus's family back in Denver was devastated by the news and the international attention it brought to their lives. His parents, both teachers at local elementary schools, found themselves fielding calls from reporters and dealing with protesters who gathered outside their home. His girlfriend, Sarah, whose warnings he had dismissed so casually, was forced to temporarily leave her apartment as media crews attempted to interview anyone connected to Marcus's life. The financial burden of a legal case quickly became apparent as the family struggled to meet the bail requirements and secure adequate legal representation for the trial. The cost of keeping Marcus in London while fighting the charges was enormous, requiring them to mortgage their family home and exhaust their savings. What had begun as a quest for internet fame had become a financial disaster that would affect his entire family for years to come. Private Mitchell, meanwhile, had become an unwitting celebrity in his own right. His dignified response to the attack and his maintenance of military bearing throughout the incident had earned him widespread admiration from both military personnel and the general public. The contrast between his professionalism and Marcus's juvenile behavior became a symbol of the broader cultural differences that the case had come to represent. The young soldier was overwhelmed by the support he received from around the world, with letters and messages pouring in from military veterans, royal supporters, and ordinary citizens who were impressed by his dedication to duty. While he maintained his characteristic modesty about the attention, the incident had clearly marked a turning point in his military career, with senior officers taking note of his exemplary conduct under difficult circumstances. As the case progressed toward trial, additional evidence emerged that painted an even more damaging picture of Marcus's intentions and character. Social media posts from years earlier showed a pattern of increasingly provocative pranks, suggesting that the Royal Guard incident was part of an escalating series of attention-seeking behaviors rather than an isolated moment of poor judgment. The prosecution team, led by senior Crown Prosecutor Amanda Richardson, built their case around the argument that Marcus's actions represented not just assault but a calculated attack on British institutions and values. Expert witnesses were prepared to testify about the historical significance of the Royal Guards, the security implications of the attack, and the psychological impact on military personnel who were targeted for public humiliation. Richardson's strategy involved presenting Marcus as someone who had deliberately chosen to target symbols of British authority for personal gain, showing complete disregard for the consequences of his actions on both the individual victim and the broader institutions involved. This was not a harmless prank that went wrong, she told her team during trial preparation. This was a premeditated attack designed to generate profit through the humiliation of a serving soldier and the institution he represents. The defense team faced the challenging task of arguing for leniency while acknowledging the clear evidence of Marcus's guilt. Chin's strategy focused on presenting him as a misguided young man who had been caught up in the toxic culture of social media fame and had genuinely failed to understand the seriousness of his actions. Character witnesses from his hometown would testify about his previously good behavior and the positive contributions he had made to his community. As the trial date approached, Marcus was forced to confront the reality that his quest for viral fame had destroyed not only his own life, but had also caused significant harm to innocent people who had become unwilling participants in his story. The legal fees alone would likely bankrupt his family, while the criminal conviction he was almost certain to receive would permanently damage his future prospects. The international attention had also spawned a cottage industry of commentary and analysis about American tourist behavior, social media culture, and respect for foreign traditions. Academic papers were being written about the case, while travel bloggers and cultural commentators used it as a cautionary tale about the importance of understanding local customs and laws when visiting foreign countries. Private Mitchell, through official military channels, had expressed his desire that Marcus understand the full impact of his actions on the victims of his prank. The young soldier had requested that any statement made during sentencing include reference to the dedication and sacrifice of all service members who perform ceremonial duties, often in difficult conditions, and always with the highest standards of professionalism. The final irony of Marcus's situation was that he had indeed achieved the viral fame he had sought, but in the worst possible way. Videos of his arrest and subsequent court appearances have been viewed millions of times, making him internationally famous as a cautionary example rather than a successful content creator. His social media followers had increased dramatically, but the comments were overwhelmingly negative, and his attempts to monetize the attention were met with widespread boycotts and advertiser withdrawals. As Marcus prepared for the trial that would determine his fate, he was forced to confront the fundamental question of whether any amount of internet fame could justify the harm he had caused to himself, his family, Private Mitchell, and the broader institutions he had thoughtlessly attacked. The answer, which had seemed so obvious during his planning phase in Denver, now appeared infinitely more complex as he faced the real-world consequences of his actions in a foreign country whose laws and traditions he had severely underestimated. The case would ultimately serve as a watershed moment in discussions about tourist responsibility, social media culture, and the clash between individual pursuit of fame and respect for institutional authority. Whatever the final outcome of the trial, Marcus Thompson had already secured his place in history as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing viral content over human dignity and legal responsibility. Tourists doused a royal guard as a prank, but was instantly arrested.